We're very fortunate to have Leilani Munter with us today, who is going to give us a talk about racing to save us from ourselves. And Leilani is a biology graduate turned racing car driver and environmental activist. She believes that it is essential for humans to adapt and evolve how we live to a sustainable way that does not destroy the world around us. Leilani is an advocate for renewable energy, solar power, electric cars, plant-based diet, and animal rights, and she is a patron of Population Matters. So let's hear about how to race to save ourselves from Leilani Munter.
Greetings. What an honor it is to join this important conference with so many esteemed scientists and thought leaders. I know some of you are probably wondering, why is a retired race car driver speaking at a conference about catastrophic risks to humanity? So I just want to clarify that before I began racing cars, I was a biology graduate from the University of California in San Diego. I started to take my activism to the racetrack in 2007 when I made the commitment to adopt and protect an acre of rainforest for every race that I ran. And while I only ran a total of 61 races in my career, as I made my way up the racing ladder, I was able to adopt more, and I finished my career having adopted more than 1,500 acres of rainforest. Outside of the race car, I try to do everything that I can to reduce my carbon footprint. I've been driving an electric car since 2013, and since January 2014, both my home and my electric car are powered by solar panels. I've been vegan since 2011. I have a veggie garden and a 550-gallon rainwater collection system. But most importantly, carbon footprint-wise, my husband and I are child-free by choice. So I try to lead by example outside of the race car, but I do believe that my biggest contribution to the environmental movement didn't actually come from my personal decisions, but rather from the public messages that I carried on my race cars. I really saw my race cars as being like 200-mile-an-hour billboards that would help me start conversations about the causes that I care about to an audience of millions of race fans. It's safe to say that racetracks were not seeing or hearing a whole lot from the environmental community. I have driven race cars promoting a future with 100% renewable energy, recycled products, an organization of veterans that are fighting for clean energy on Capitol Hill, solar power, wind power, 2 documentary films, the Academy Award-winning film The Cove, as well as Blackfish. Both of those films address the cruelty of the captive cetacean industry. And while Blackfish is addressing orca captivity, The Cove shows the connection between dolphin captivity and the largest slaughter of dolphins in the world. And then for the last 3 years of my career, from 2017 up until my retirement after Daytona in 2019, I drove the first ever vegan-themed race car in the world and gave away over 30,000 vegan cheeseburgers to race fans at places like Daytona and Talladega. In 2014, I began driving to all my races in my electric car, inviting race fans to join me at the EV charging stations on my road trip to the track so that they could learn more about electric cars. And that same year, my race team became the first in history to ever power our pit box using 100% solar power. I know that the racetrack is really the last place where you would expect to find environmental messages. And that's precisely why I did it, because anyone who is engaged in any broad effort to speak to the public faces this question. Do I speak only to friendly audiences, or do I face the doubters and the hostiles? If we only address those who already agree with us, then nothing changes. And if we only work with people who already believe in the same things that we do, then who is going to change the minds of those who don't? It's a more difficult conversation to have, but it is also the most important, because this is how we move the needle and create change. One memory that sticks out for me was back in the very early stages of my activism. I came across an argument that had started on a NASCAR forum. One member of the forum was very annoyed that I was promoting a documentary that was new at the time called An Inconvenient Truth. He called me all kinds of names and said that I was brainwashed by Al Gore, and others chimed in to agree. But then another member of the forum asked him if he had ever seen the movie and questioned how he could judge it if he hadn't actually seen it. And the thread became very long, and people were arguing back and forth. And by the end of the thread, people were posting graphs of the parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And so the argument had shifted and was no longer about me, but instead they were discussing the science behind the film. And I sat back and I thought, wow, I just started an argument about climate change on a NASCAR forum. And that made me smile. I had started a dialogue, and that is the first step in creating change, to start a dialogue between the two sides. And that very simple thing became very important to me. I had become a bridge between the environmentalists and the race fans, and that would become the singular goal for the remainder of my racing career. In 2012, I began working on a documentary film called Racing Extinction about the current 6th mass extinction of species. As many of you already know, this era is called the Anthropocene, which translates to the age of man. It means our human impact on the planet is so great that we are actually changing the fossil record of the future. The last mass extinction event was about 65 million years ago, the event that took out the dinosaurs. It is widely believed that a collision of an asteroid is what caused that extinction. Here's a short clip from our film.
There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet. There's the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian. There's the Triassic, Jurassic, and then the KT extinction, the one that killed the dinosaurs. It's very difficult to comprehend in deep time, 4.6 billion years of Earth's history. So if you take, say, the history of the Earth and try to squeeze it into a 24-hour clock, where does man fit on that clock? A few seconds before midnight. That's it. We're the new kid on the block.
Today, we have no trouble identifying the cause of this 6th mass extinction event. Humans are the cause. Although we represent just 0.01% of all living things, in this very short time, we have already had a catastrophic effect on our natural world. Humans have already destroyed 83% of all wild mammals and half of the plants. 1/3 of the arable land on the planet is being used to grow feed for livestock. And if you look at the weight of land vertebrates on our planet, 67% are now livestock, 32% are humans, and just 1% are wild animals. Farmed poultry makes up 70% of all the birds on the planet, with just 30% being wild. We are losing so much so fast. And I'm going to let Christopher Clark from Cornell's Bioacoustics Laboratory show you with sound the instruments in nature that we are losing. Here's another clip from our film, Racing Extinction.
The whole world is singing, clicking and grinding and whistling and thumping, but we've stopped listening.
The Cornell Bioacoustical Laboratory has the largest repository of animal sounds on the planet. They've been collecting them since the 1930s.
So there's this range of sounds from the largest animal ever to live on this planet to the tiniest little insects. This is a song recording of a male oo singing on Hawaii. These birds mate for life, so he would be singing a duet with his mate, where he sings and she sings back and forth. Here comes the male song. There's no response. Here's the male song again. That's the last male of a species singing for a female who will never come. He is totally alone. And now his voice is gone.
Of all the issues humanity faces, population worries me the most. It is the granddaddy of all our other environmental issues. Climate change, ocean acidification, deforestation, pollution, species extinction, and loss of biodiversity. The dramatic increase of human population accelerates every single one of them. It took humans 200,000 years to hit a population of 1 billion people. We hit that mark in 1804. Just 126 years later, our population doubled to 2 billion. It then took only 30 years to hit 3 billion, and then only 14 years to reach 4 billion, which we did in 1974, the year that I was born. In my 47-year lifetime, the population has almost doubled. Earth is currently home to over 7.8 billion people. Since I was born, we have been adding 1 billion people to the planet every 12 years. And with our current rate of meat consumption, for every billion people we add to our planet, we must add another 10 billion farm animals to slaughter for food. Back when I was studying at UC San Diego, my biochemistry professor came into class and told us to close our books and showed us a film about human population. I remember being just devastated and walking across the college campus with him talking about it. That was over 25 years ago, but his message stuck with me. That was the day that I made the decision to not have children. I realize now that that one day in biochemistry class changed my life forever, and I'm very thankful I didn't skip class that day. Many people will argue that technology can save us. And while it's true that reducing overconsumption, in addition to adaptation of more sustainable technologies, can help us reduce our individual impact, if we do not address the main factor here, population, we are ignoring the root of all these other issues. I like to make the comparison that if your house was flooding due to a faucet that was turned on full blast, you can carry buckets of water out of your house, and each sustainable action, being vegan, driving an electric car, putting up solar panels, each of those things could represent a bucket of water. But unless you actually turn off the faucet, the flooding will continue. My husband and I were married 12 years ago, and we are happily child-free by choice. I want more of us to feel comfortable talking about this because it's time for us to speak up and have these somewhat uncomfortable conversations. Pre-pandemic, I had found a clever way to start this conversation with strangers, often while I was traveling. Whenever somebody asked me if I had kids, I would answer, actually, my husband and I are child-free by choice. This would let the stranger know that it was not that we wanted children and could not have them, which could be a painful subject, but that it was a conscious choice, something my husband and I had many conversations about early on when our relationship first became serious. And just by adding those two little words at the end of the sentence, by choice, I found that many people were interested in talking about population, both parents and non-parents. Many parents expressed that they didn't know about population issues when they had their kids, but they planned to have conversations with their children about it. It's incredibly important for us to normalize the choice to be child-free. Psychology shows that peer pressure and fitting in is a big motivator for human behavior. For example, the Journal of Consumer Research reported on an experiment run by a large hotel chain to examine the best way to get their customers to reuse their towels. 2 signs were left in their hotel rooms. The first was a standard environmental message about the water that would be saved, and the second, and by far the more effective sign, said that the majority of fellow guests had reused their towels. Another study, done by researchers who teamed up with a utility in California, provided customers with home energy reports so that people could compare their energy use with that of their neighbors. Of the 35,000 homes that received the energy report, along with tips on how to save energy, 75% of the homes took action to cut their energy use. This competition among neighbors is often referred to as keeping up with the Joneses. These studies show that humans are social animals. We want to fit in. And this well-known behavior prompting people to mimic the actions of their peers gives me hope to our future, thanks in part to a study done in 2011 at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Scientists there wanted to find out if there was a tipping point for the spread of ideas. And what they found was that if just 10% of a population has an unwavering belief in an idea, it is inevitable that the majority of the population will adopt that idea. One of the scientists that worked on the study said they would watch the idea struggle to make it to the 10% mark. But once it reached that threshold, the idea would spread like a flame. So I still have hope for our future, and I do think we can still turn this thing around. One of my favorite parts of Racing Extinction is when photographer Joel Sartori explains why, despite the incredible challenges that we are facing, why right now is an excellent time to be alive if you want to save species.
OPS started out as a way to document endangered species. There's all these creatures that are just on the brink. And you can throw up your hands very easily and say, well, it's too big of an issue. But you know what? There's a few people doing great things. You know, Joel Sartori's work is some of the most fabulous work I've ever seen.
Can we lift his chin up a little bit for me, please? Perfect. PhotoArc's my 20-year attempt to photograph every captive species on Earth, to get the public to care and save them while there's still time to do so. A lot of times these pictures I do are the only national coverage these animals will ever get before they go extinct. This is it. This is their one chance. This is the very last dusky seaside sparrow, last wild-caught bird. There's another sparrow just down the road, the Florida grasshopper sparrow, that's very near extinction. You hear something?
That's a grasshopper sparrow. 91% of this prairie habitat is gone. Mm-hmm. We're roughly around 20 sparrows a year.
20.
20.
From 150 to 20. So it's getting harder every year to find the bird, huh? I really hope these pictures I do aren't just some sort of an archive of the things we lost, but instead it's a chance to get people interested, get them to look these animals in the eye, and fall in love with them. The pictures of the sparrow ended up on the cover of Audubon. When the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service saw that, they went from allocating $20,000 or $30,000 a year to about $1.3 million to try to turn things around for this bird. There's never been a better time to be alive if you want to save species, because there's so many on the ropes. It's an excellent time to be alive, because we all can change things right now. There he goes.
Estimates of the carrying capacity of the planet vary considerably, but after a year-long study done by researchers at Cornell, ecologists agreed that the ideal number of people that the planet could handle living in relative prosperity with access to clean water and electricity is 2 billion. We are already 5.8 billion over Cornell's estimated carrying capacity. So while it is the natural instinct for human beings to reproduce, perhaps we need to consider one of the solutions to the problems facing our finite Earth is to not do so. David Pimentel, Cornell professor of ecology and systematics, who worked on this study, said, "All the changes suggested to make life on Earth sustainable and prosperous are achievable with currently available technologies. Less certain is the will of people to change." Charles Darwin once said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change." And so in the spirit of Charles Darwin, it is time for us to utilize our intelligence to adapt and to change the way that we are living on this planet. This generation has been called upon to answer the most noble of duties, to ensure the survival of future generations with the most basic of survival mechanisms, adaptation. The ultimate intelligence of our species will be determined by whether we face our population issue and get it under control or continue to sweep it under the rug because it's an uncomfortable conversation. The future of life on Earth depends on us doing the former. Thank you.
Thank you, Leilani, for this very uplifting talk in a way as well, with the extracts from your documentary. And I agree with Carl, the segment about the O.O. bird calling for his female is completely heartbreaking. So Leilani, if you don't mind turning on your camera, I will ask you a couple of questions now. And everybody, please remember to also jot down your questions for Leilani in the chat so I can ask them on your behalf. So Leilani, are you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
You are. There you go. I think you just had to say something so everybody could see you. Hello. Thank you so much for joining. And I noticed as well that you were here all day yesterday. So thank you so much for listening to all the speakers and for being so active in the chat. It's really appreciated.
Of course, yes, I'm so interested in all the talks have been so fantastic. And actually the next film that I'm researching right now is on mega risks to humanity and existential risk. That's what my next documentary is focused on. So this was a way for me to study up on my next film.
Oh, brilliant. And I hope everybody then can be a guest speaker in your next documentary then. Right, so I'm going to start by saying that you've made an admirable a personal commitment to saving the planet, and you're leading by example, which is very rare and very impressive. So do you think that individual commitment is the key to change, or do you envision that we need a change at a non-individual level as well?
I think we need both. We need systematic overhauls of the way our energy system works, the big things that need to be done by governments and corporations, and something that, like, you know, one person like me cannot change. But I also think, as I spoke about in the talk, you know, individual actions and the psychology of humanity to want to mimic and fit in with their peers makes these small changes very important. So, like, just for example, I live in North Carolina, and when I got my electric car, you know, I would come out from the grocery store and there would be people gathered around the car waiting for me to come out of the grocery store to ask me questions, because it was so unusual. You know, this is back in like 2013, and at that time there weren't very many Teslas in North Carolina. So I would take people on test drives, and all of those things I look at as you're planting a seed. And you're making somebody think about maybe making their next car purchase an electric car, or even just here in the neighborhood when we were putting up our solar panels, you know, I had a lot of neighbors stop in and kind of ask questions about how long does it take for you to earn the money back that you're spending on the panels. And so because humans are social creatures and we want to fit in, if the majority of people start to move towards electric cars, you're more likely to influence people to make that move. And you're seeing now, you know, almost all the major auto manufacturers are starting to announce, if they're not already making electric cars, they're trying to compete. So I don't underestimate the power of those individual choices, because it can shift the overall society into accepting those ideas. Veganism has really taken off. That's increasing every year. It's so easy to be vegan now. Like when I became vegan in 2011, it was tough, but because the numbers are picking up so quickly, there's just so many companies out there producing vegan meats and cheeses and ice creams and anything you can think of, it's much easier. So I think that public shift, you know, maybe that's the thing that gets the systems and the governments and the bigger entities to make, you know, more impactful moves based on the fact that the society is changing their behaviors. And I think people in general now are becoming more conscious of everything they do as an impact on the planet, whether it's the car you drive or the food that you eat. And you know, obviously population being an issue that I think is very important. I think talking about, you know, the choice that I made to remain child-free after learning about human overpopulation is powerful, because it makes other women feel like, oh, okay, I'm, you know, this is a choice that other women are making and talking about, and that pressure to sort of, you know, get married and have children. Now you can just get married and you don't have to do the second part, and that should be okay, and that should be accepted by society, and not, we shouldn't be looked down upon for that or judged negatively for that choice.
I think you make a lot of very interesting points about societal pressure in your talk. And I found it really interesting when you mentioned the Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute study about the 10% tipping point. So would you say we're close to that tipping point in terms of understanding the change that needs to be made regarding the climate crisis or overpopulation or the other issues that we've talked about today and yesterday? What's your general feeling about how the general public is absorbing these ideas?
I definitely feel like we're approaching, if not have already reached, the 10% tipping point on people understanding climate change, understanding that, you know, 7.8 billion of us, all of our decisions collectively has a huge impact on the planet. I think veganism is close to 10% if it's not there yet. I think people with electric cars will approach that. I think there's only like 3% of the cars on the planet right now are electric, but you can see from all of the unveilings from, you know, the legacy automakers that they're all moving in that direction. So I think we're rapidly approaching the 10% tipping point with electric cars, if we're not already almost there. Population, I feel like, is the one issue that, you know, I have found that just a lot of people they don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable. They're scared to address it. There's lots of environmental groups that just sort of, you know, don't address it at all, like it's not happening and it's not a part of all these other problems that we have. But it is the granddaddy issue of them all. And it is the one that is accelerating every single other environmental problem that we're trying to solve. So as long as we keep increasing the human population, we're going to make it harder and harder to solve ocean acidification and climate change and deforestation and habitat destruction and loss of species. And, you know, to not accept that those things are tied to each other is just crazy to me. You know, I liked what one of the other speakers said, Paul Ehrlich said in a film called 2050. He said something to the effect of, you know, there are always people that are trying to say it's consumption is the problem, not population. But that's like saying the area of a triangle is determined only by its width and not by its length. Obviously, consumption and population multiply together to give you your impact on your ecological system around you. So I felt that was a really eloquent way of describing it. And I guess I'm just frustrated a little bit that population seems to be one of the issues that just many people don't want to talk about. So I'm very thankful that that this conference, it was wonderful hearing Paul talk yesterday and then Jane O'Sullivan earlier today, addressing these issues, because it does seem like the one thing that always gets swept under the rug.
Yes. So we have a question for you from Gordon Weiss, who asks, what is your impression of the rate of engagement among celebrities and influencers? Is it increasing at an appreciable rate?
I don't feel like there's very many celebrities that get involved with environmental issues. At least to me, it feels like a smaller number. And I think one of the reasons that happens is that as soon as you speak up, or a celebrity speaks up about environmental issues, they get criticized for everything that they do. And so they know that they're going to sort of be picked apart and looked at so closely. And so they're almost afraid to bring it up because somebody might, get a paparazzi picture of them getting into an Uber that's not an electric car. And then, the headline will be, so-called environmentalist. And they're just afraid of being, I think, drawing the spotlight to that, because they feel like their personal choices or their personal actions are going to be under so much scrutiny. So, there's a few celebrities that are very vocal about it. Mark Ruffalo, he does a ton of activism work in the environmental world. Leonardo DiCaprio, there's people here and there, but I feel like, I wish there were a lot more.
Yes, I find your commitment to leading by example very inspiring. And admirable, because yeah, if you were captured by a paparazzi, I bet you would always be very virtuous. So I wanted to ask you about your interest in cetacean captive population. So I understand from your talk that you did 2 documentaries about it, and recently I've been struck by the reports. I don't know if you noticed in the Mediterranean of orcas, I think, attacking boats. And I wonder, what's your feeling about what's happening under the oceans? It's getting a little bit more attention at the moment, but it seems like it's perhaps less visible to us than what's happening to terrestrial wildlife. And do you think this incident in the Mediterranean could be perhaps the nature basically trying to fight back a little bit, or is it just my imagination?
Actually, I don't know about the story of the orca attacking the boat. I'm going to have to look that up after this talk. But I will say that obviously ocean issues are not getting as much attention. And I think if you look at all the NGOs in the world that are dedicated to environmental efforts, the percentage that are actually focused on the ocean is very small. I want to say it's like under 5% in comparison to the ones that are working on land-based issues. And I think that might be a factor of, if it's not in your backyard, you're not thinking about it. And so if you don't, I'm inland, I live in Charlotte, I'm not anywhere near the ocean. But as a scuba diver, I care very much about the bleaching that's happening in coral reefs. And so even though it's not in my backyard, I'm thinking about that all the time. But I think a lot of people, it's, out of sight, out of mind, and there's not enough focus on the ocean. In our film Racing Extinction, we interview a man, Dr. Boris Verm, who talks about phytoplankton and how ever since the Industrial Revolution, phytoplankton blooms have been dropping every single year. And, the estimates vary, but anywhere between 50 to 70% of all the oxygen on Earth is actually coming from phytoplankton in the ocean. And so these phytoplankton blooms dropping, that's a very big problem, but obviously people tend to focus on the Amazon rainforest and things that we can see, because we can't see the phytoplankton in the ocean disappearing unless you're, NASA, and you've got satellite images that you're taking of these phytoplankton blooms. It's not really in the media that those are, in essence being deforested just in the same way that the Amazon is, but you can't get those pictures of you know, the way the Amazon is on fire and you can see it degrading before your eyes. It's much harder to sort of get into the public consciousness that losing something like phytoplankton that's so tiny that you can't even see it is an important issue to the health of the overall system of the planet, and is part of the oxygen that we breathe every day.
Of course. I think, Carl, Joan tells me that you may have something to say about the cetaceans and orcas. Is that right?
Well, it's sort of right. I may have something to say. Wild orcas have never hurt anybody. So the fact that these orcas in the Mediterranean recently have been shoving several boats around is very strange. It's nothing that anybody can explain. It's open to some speculation. Some of the speculation is that they might not have had full age adults with them to you know, model the cultural behavior, because most orcas tend to avoid contact with people. They may have just decided that shoving boats around is fun because they're a little bored. They certainly are not mistaking a boat for food. They're exceptionally intelligent. So it's just some speculation about an event that is unprecedented and frankly really weird.
That's what I thought as well.
You know, I'm all for the animals fighting back, to be honest. All my favorite movies are movies where the animals are fighting back against humans.
So I don't know why, but there's been a few messages that instead of going to the general chat have come to me. So I'll just read them out to you because they're very sweet. So Helen Empt says, Leilani, you're awesome and a real inspiration. And Peter Glick, who was our speaker on water yesterday, said that your talk was very moving and inspiring, and he thanks you. So I'm just going to finish with one last question, which is, what do you think, Leilani, that each and every one of us can do to use the time that we have on this planet to make a difference?
I think being vocal, whether it's to the people around you, your friends and your family who might not agree with you. And again, I'll go back to that. Try and have conversations with people who aren't on your side yet, because all of us getting together and talking to other people that agree with us and sort of understand all these issues is great. And it gives you a sense of community. And I think it helps give us all strength to keep going out into the world and fighting for these things. But really the most important thing that we can do is to have those super uncomfortable conversations with the people that are in your life that don't necessarily get it yet. And when you have the knowledge that everyone here has about what's happening to our planet, you know, not everybody cares about these things. Not everybody is immersed in this world like we are. And so I think, you know, it's both a burden and a curse in that it's a burden to carry the heavy knowledge of what is happening to us. And with that also comes a responsibility for you to try and educate the people that are around you and hopefully try to wake them up. And, you know, they're not fun conversations to have necessarily. And I had to have a lot of those, obviously, in my racing career when I'm talking to people that are, you know, meat eaters and they're at a NASCAR race and I'm trying to get them to think about electric cars and solar panels and vegan food. And it's difficult, but it's important to sort of bring that message to people where they are. Those NASCAR fans were not going to show up at an environmental conference about clean energy or a vegan festival, but they were at the racetrack. And that's why bringing it to them there is important. So I think, you know, the overall advice I would give is to get out of the comfort zone, get out of your box and, you know, have those super uncomfortable conversations, but that's how you shift things. And actually that Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute study about the 10% tipping point, it talks about, I encourage everybody to Google that. And if you just pull up 10% tipping point, study, you will find it. And it's so interesting how the scientists analyzed the way that people were being converted slowly. And it was by having conversations. It was by having conversations with somebody who didn't agree with them, you know, and then talking to a second person. And if that second person also didn't agree with them, they started to rethink and reconsider their own beliefs and realize that, the majority of people around me are thinking this other way. Maybe I should reconsider it. So yeah, have those super uncomfortable conversations, and then things like this conference are really great because we get to be among our peers that already agree with us, which is wonderful, but we're not necessarily changing the needle.
Yeah, it is reassuring though to hear people who agree. Thank you so much for your time, Leilani. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.